This story is reaching its most tense moment. If you want to see justice done, leave a like, subscribe, and comment justice for the next episodes. I remember the stillness of the grand hallway, the morning, the way the sunlight filtered through the stained glass of the front door, casting patterns of amber and blue across the polished floorboards. My name is Eleanor, and for 68 years, this house was my fortress of clarity. I had raised David within these walls, spent decades maintaining every corner, ensuring that the scent of beeswax and lemon oil greeted everyone who entered. When David brought Sarah home, I didn't see a threat. I saw a daughter. I welcomed her into the kitchen, sharing the secret recipes passed down from my grandmother, believing she would be the one to keep the hearth burning long after I was gone. She was elegant, with a poise that I admired, though her laughter always felt a bit too rehearsed, echoing through the high ceilings like a bell that wasn't quite in tune. Back then, I told myself I was being judgmental. We were the image of a successful American family. Every evening, we gathered in the dining room, the heavy silver cutlery clinking against fine china as we discussed David's career and our shared future. I had spent a lifetime building a substantial estate with my late husband's properties, investments, and a legacy that was meant to be David's bedrock. Sarah was incredibly attentive during those early days. She would sit beside me in the library, her eyes fixed on me as I explained the family ledgers and the history of our holdings. I thought she was showing respect for the work it took to build our life. I felt a profound sense of peace, believing my final chapters would be spent in the warmth of their care. I didn't realize that Sarah wasn't admiring my life. She was auditing it. She wasn't listening to my stories. She was looking for the cracks in the foundation. Every smile she gave me across the dinner table was a mask, hiding a calculated ambition that I was too blinded by maternal love to see. I felt secure, anchored by the history of my home, never imagining that the very person I invited to my table was already planning how to take the chair from under me. The silence in the house began to feel heavy, like a physical weight pressing against my chest. It wasn't just that Sarah was taking over. It was the way she made me feel invisible in my own skin. I remember one Tuesday afternoon. The rain was streaking against the tall windows of the parlor, and I decided to organize the old family photo albums. It was a task I loved, a way to anchor myself to the truth of who I was. But when I reached for the shelf, where the albums had sat for 40 years, my hands met empty air. My heart hammered against my ribs a frantic, trapped bird. I searched every cabinet, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. Just as I was about to call out for David, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched me scramble, a small, clinical smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Are you looking for these, Eleanor?" She finally asked, pointing to a cardboard box already taped shut near the door. "We talked about this, remember? You said the memories were becoming too painful, that you wanted them moved to the attic so you wouldn't get confused again." I stared at her, my throat tight. "I never said that. Sarah never." She walked toward me, her footsteps silent on the rug, and placed her cool, dry hands on my shoulders. "Oh, honey. You were crying for an hour about how you didn't recognize the faces anymore. David was so heartbroken to see you like that. Don't make it harder for him by denying it now." Her words were like poison, dripped into an open wound. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to run to David and tell him that his wife was a monster. But as if on cue, David walked in, his shoulders slumped with the fatigue of a man carrying the world. Sarah's demeanor shifted instantly. Her grip on my shoulders became a comforting embrace. "She's having a rough afternoon, David," she whispered, her voice trembling with a fake, practiced sorrow. "She's insisting she didn't want the albums moved. I'm so worried the aggression is starting." David looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my son's eyes, fear of me. He didn't see his mother. He saw a ticking time bomb of neurological decay. I tried to speak, but the words felt like dry sand in my mouth. If I fought back, I was aggressive. If I cried, I was unstable. If I stayed silent, I was slipping away. She had trapped me in a cage of her own design, and every exit was blocked by a lie I couldn't disprove. I began to notice Sarah spending more time on the phone with someone she called Drive Daughter Ace. She would speak in hushed, urgent tones, mentioning dosage adjustments and cognitive decline. When I asked who he was, she told me he was a specialist David had hired to help me navigate this transition. In reality, I had never met the man, yet he was already signing my life away based on Sarah's reports. The meals Sarah prepared started to taste different, metallic, slightly bitter, and I found myself sleeping through most of the day, waking up with a heavy, leaden feeling in my limbs. Every time I woke, Sarah was there, sitting in the corner of my room, watching me with those unblinking eyes, waiting for me to lose one more piece of myself so she could claim the rest. I began to cling to my morning prayers like a drowning sailor clings to a piece of driftwood. Every Sunday, I used to sit in the front pew of the church, the smell of old wood and incense providing a sanctuary that my own home no longer offered. But Sarah soon found a way to take that from me too. "The crowds are too much for you, Eleanor," she would say, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern. "All those eyes on you. What if you have an episode in front of the congregation? Let's pray here, in the quiet." She wanted me isolated, away from the watchful eyes of my lifelong friends, who might see that my hands weren't shaking from age, but from fear. I retreated into a state of deep denial. I told myself that David was just tired, that if I performed the role of the perfect mother well enough, he would see through Sarah's lies. I started overcompensating, waking up before dawn to scrub floors that were already clean, trying to prove my competence, my vitality. I sacrificed my pride, allowing Sarah to cut my meat, to pick out my clothes, thinking that if I showed total submission, she would stop the attacks. I prayed for God to open David's eyes, but my prayers felt like they were hitting the ceiling and shattering. One evening, I found a small leather-bound notebook I had hidden behind the loose brick in the pantry, my secret diary, where I recorded every lie Sarah told. It was my only tether to reality. When I saw it was gone, a cold, hollow void opened in my stomach. I found Sarah in the living room, tossing the pages into the fireplace, one by one. The orange flames licked the ink of my memories, turning my truth into ash. "You shouldn't keep such confusing notes, Eleanor," she said, without even looking at me. "It only fuels your paranoia, doctor." Reese says it's common for patients in your stage to invent conspiracies to explain their loss of function. I stood there, watching my life burn, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Perhaps I was the monster. Perhaps my mind was a fractured mirror. I looked at David, who was standing by the window, his back to me. He wouldn't even turn around. I realized then that my sacrifice of silence was only helping Sarah build my coffin. I was denying the truth to protect him from the pain of his wife's betrayal, but in doing so, I was handing her the shovel. The pills she gave me with my evening tea made the world blur, and as I lay in bed that night, the cross on my wall seemed to tilt and mock me. I was losing my faith in everything my son, my mind, and the justice of a world that would allow a predator to wear the face of an angel. The truth didn't come as a whisper. It came as a physical blow that left me gasping for air in the shadows of my own home. It was a Thursday, the day Sarah usually took me to see Doctor. Reese, or so she told David. That morning, I had managed to spit out the bitter pill she forced down my throat with my tea, hiding it beneath the cushion of my armchair. For the first time in weeks, the heavy, gray curtain in my brain began to lift. My vision sharpened, and the lethargy that had turned my bones to lead started to dissolve. I felt a cold, crystalline anger vibrating in my chest. When Sarah came to my room, dressed in a sharp, expensive suit I didn't recognize, she didn't look like a caregiver. She looked like a woman who had already inherited the world. She told me to stay in bed, claiming the doctor was coming to the house instead. I feigned sleep, slowing my breathing, watching her through the slit of my eyelids. An hour later, I heard the heavy front door open. I crept to the top of the stairs, my bare feet silent on the cold wood. Below, in the foyer, stood a man I had seen in newspaper social columns' Doctor. Julian Reese. But he wasn't carrying a medical bag. He was carrying a bottle of vintage champagne. What I saw next shattered the last remnants of my heart. Sarah didn't greet him as a professional. She threw herself into his arms with a hunger that was obscene. They stood there, in the house my husband and I had built with sweat and integrity, kissing with a frantic, desperate greed. "Is it done?" Reese whispered, his voice smooth and devoid of any healer's empathy. Sarah pulled back, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "The last of the signatures are being verified today. David is so broken, he doesn't even look at the documents anymore. He just signs where I tell him, thinking he's protecting her estate from her own confusion. By next month, the trust will be under our joint management." I clutched the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. They were talking about me as if I were already dead, a carcass to be picked clean. But the betrayal cut deeper. Reese laughed, a sound that chilled me to the marrow. The sedative hypnotic mix is working wonders. She'll be so far gone in another few weeks that even if she screams the truth, it will sound like the ramblings of a lunatic. We'll have her moved to the facility by the lake. High security, no visitors without your approval. Sarah leaned in, her voice a low, venomous purr. "And David? He'll be too guilty to visit. He thinks he's the one failing her. He's the perfect shield." They walked into the study, my husband's study, and closed the door, leaving me alone in the dark hallway. I wasn't just losing my money or my house. I was losing my son to a woman who was using his love for me as a weapon to destroy us both. The shock was so profound that I had to slide down the wall to keep from collapsing. The man responsible for my diagnosis was my daughter-in-law's lover, and they were poisoning my blood to steal my life. The air in the hallway felt like ice against my skin, or perhaps it was just the blood draining from my face as I watched them. I stayed pressed against the cold plaster of the wall, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, unadulterated terror. Through the crack in the study door, I could see the glow of the desk lamp, the lamp my husband, Arthur, used to sit under while he read me poetry. Now, it illuminated the blueprint of my destruction. Sarah was leaning over the mahogany desk, her fingers tracing the legal documents with a predatory grace. The power of attorney is the key, Julian, she said, her voice devoid of the soft, performative warmth she used with David. Once the court recognizes the early-onset diagnosis from a prestigious doctor like you, David becomes a mere figurehead. I'll handle the liquidations. He's already so paralyzed by the thought of losing his mother's mind that he won't question why the investment accounts are closing. Reese poured the champagne, the bubbles hissing in the quiet room like a nest of vipers. He handed a glass to her, his eyes dark with a mixture of lust and greed. And the medication? If we increase the dosage of the benzodiazepines, the cognitive fog will become permanent. She'll have more wandering episodes. It justifies the move to the restricted ward at the lake facility. No one looks twice at an old woman who can't remember her own name. I felt a sob rise in my throat, a primal sound of agony that I had to choke back with my own hand until I tasted salt and skin. They weren't just stealing my money, they were murdering my soul, piece by piece, while David sat in his office downtown, mourning a woman who was being systematically erased. I watched Sarah take a sip of the champagne, a look of pure, chilling satisfaction on her face. "Do you know what the best part is?" she whispered, moving closer to him. "David actually thanked me this morning. He cried on my shoulder, telling me he doesn't know what he'd do without me to help him through this tragedy. He thinks I'm his saint." Her laugh was a jagged shard of glass, cutting through the history of our home. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had held David as a baby, the hands that were now being labeled as useless and confused by a fraudulent medical report. The betrayal wasn't just Sarah's, it was the realization that the world I had built was so fragile that a few well-placed lies and a vial of poison could turn my own son against my reality. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was an obstacle to be cleared, a line item on a balance sheet. As they toasted to their new life, a life built on the ruins of mine, I realized that I was completely, utterly alone. If I spoke now, they would call the orderlies. If I ran, I had nowhere to go. I was a prisoner in a house I owned, guarded by the son I had died for. I stood frozen, a ghost haunting the hallways of my own life, as the air in the house grew thick with the stench of their celebration. From my hiding place, I watched Reese set the bottle down on the very desk where I had signed David's first college fund papers. He pulled the small, amber vial from his pocket, the source of my dementia. I've increased the concentration of the liquid sedative, he said, his voice as clinical as a death sentence. It's tasteless. Mix it with her evening chamomile. By tomorrow morning, she won't just be confused, Sarah. She'll be unable to form a coherent sentence. If David tries to talk to her about the trust, she'll just stare at him with that vacant, glassy look we've perfected. It's the final nail. Sarah took the vial, holding it up to the light of the desk lamp like it was a precious jewel. A dark, twisted smile played on her lips. You have no idea how exhausting it's been, Julian. Playing the devoted daughter-in-law, holding David's hand while he weeps for his fading mother. It's a performance that deserves an Oscar. She laughed, and the sound was like a blade twisting in my gut. The other day, she actually tried to tell him she felt fine. I just had to remind him of the imaginary stove incident I fabricated, and he shut her down immediately. He's so conditioned to believe me that he actually gets angry at her for denying her illness. It's beautiful, really. I've turned her own son into her jailer. The depth of the depravity made the world tilt. They weren't just stealing my wealth. They were weaponizing my son's love for me to destroy me. I heard the clink of their glasses again, a toast to my mental death. And the house? Reese asked, his hand sliding across the mahogany surface. Sold, Sarah replied flatly. I've already been in contact with a developer. David thinks we're moving to a smaller place to simplify things for my care. He has no idea the papers he signed today were actually the preliminary sale agreements. By the time he realizes the truth, the money will be in the offshore account we set up, and Eleanor will be locked away in that facility, sedated into silence. I felt a surge of nausea so strong I had to press my forehead against the cold, dark wood of the door frame. My husband's legacy, my son's future, my very identity, all of it was being liquidated for a life Sarah wanted to lead with a man who helped her poison me. I looked at the shadow they cast on the floor, to predators feasting on the remains of a family. I realized then that every forgetful moment, every time I felt my tongue grow heavy and my thoughts slip away, it wasn't age. It was them. They had been killing me in plain sight, and I had been thanking Sarah for the tea that was erasing my soul. The shock hardened into something else, a cold, jagged shard of survival. I couldn't scream. I couldn't cry. If they knew I was awake, if they knew the fog had lifted even for an hour, they would finish me right there. I had to remain the lunatic they created until I could find a way to strike back. Support our channel. This story is reaching its most tense moment. If you want to see justice done, leave a like, subscribe, and comment justice for the next episodes. The confrontation didn't happen with a scream. It happened in the suffocating silence of the dining room, under the watchful eyes of the family portraits that Sarah was so eager to sell. I had spent the afternoon pouring my medication into the soil of the potted ferns, feeling my mind sharpen into a jagged, lethal edge. When David came home, looking gray with exhaustion, Sarah moved toward him with her usual practiced grace, ready to whisper more lies about my agitated state. But I stood at the head of the table, my hands trembling not with age, but with a fury that felt biblical. "Sit down, David," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a cold wind. Sarah froze, her eyes narrowing as she realized the fog hadn't taken me today. She tried to intervene, her voice a sugary poison. Eleanor, dear, you're having another episode. Let's get you back to bed before you say something you'll forget tomorrow. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes locked on my son. I haven't forgotten a thing, David. Not the taste of the tea she gives me, nor the sound of her laughing in your father's study with Dr. Reese while they toasted to our ruin. The room went deathly still. I saw the confusion on David's face, the way he looked at Sarah for a translation of my madness. Sarah let out a soft, pitying laugh. See, David, now it's delusions of infidelity. It's getting worse so fast. She reached for my arm, her grip tight and warning, but I threw her hand off with a strength that shocked us both. I pulled a crumpled piece of paper from my pocketed document I had snatched from the study trash, showing the offshore account details. Is this a delusion, David? Or is the sale of this house, the one you signed for today, also a figment of my imagination? The air felt like it was being sucked out of the room. David took the paper, his hands shaking as he read. Sarah's face transformed, the mask of the saintly caregiver evaporated, replaced by the cold, sharp features of a cornered predator. She didn't deny it. Instead, she turned to me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. You're a senile old woman, Eleanor. No one will believe you over a certified medical professional. She turned back to David, her voice shifting to a desperate, manipulative plea. She stole that, David. She's been snooping, twisting things, because she can't accept she's losing her mind. Are you really going to trust a woman who puts her glasses in the fridge over your own wife? I looked at my son, seeing the agonizing war behind his eyes. He wanted to believe her because the alternative that he had helped destroy his own mother was too much to bear. It was the ultimate test, the word of the mother who raised him versus the woman he shared his bed with. I stood my ground, my heart breaking for the pain I was about to cause him, but knowing that if I didn't break him now, Sarah would bury us both. The silence that followed my accusation was so thick it felt like it could be touched. David stood there, clutching the crumpled bank statement, his eyes darting between the woman he loved and the mother who had given him everything. I could see his world fracturing. Sarah, however, didn't crumble. She shifted. Her posture changed from the delicate, concerned caregiver to something rigid and predatory. She stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. David, look at her. Look at the sweat on her brow, the way her hands are shaking. This is exactly what Julian warned us about the paranoia, the sudden bursts of manufactured memory. She's trying to destroy us because she can't control her own mind anymore. I felt the poison she had been feeding me for weeks still lingering in my system, making my head throb, but I forced my spine to stay straight. The stove, David, I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of 1,000 suppressed truths. She told you I left the stove on. Ask her which burner. Ask her why the gas bill didn't spike that month. Ask her why she was meeting Dr. Reese at the Blue Velvet Lounge on Tuesday nights when she told you she was at her mother's. Sarah's face paled, for a split second a crack in the armor. I saw David notice it. That tiny, microscopic hesitation was more powerful than any document. "Eleanor, stop this!" Sarah hissed, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying intensity. "You're hurting him. Can't you see how much you're hurting your son with these lies?" She turned to David, tears real or perfectly faked. I couldn't tell welling in her eyes. "She's doing this because she knows we were looking at the lake facility. She's terrified, David, and she's lashing out. If you listen to her now, you're just feeding the illness. We need to call Julian now." She reached for the phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I knew that if that man entered this house, I would never leave it again. He would sedate me, and by morning, I would be the unstable woman they needed me to be. "Give me the phone, Sarah," David said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a hollow, dead quality that stopped her in her tracks. He looked at the document again, then at the photo of my late husband on the mantel. "My mother has many faults, Sarah, but she has never been a liar. And she's never been greedy." He looked up, and for the first time in months, he really saw me. Not the patient. Not the problem. His mother. "Why is there an offshore account in your maiden name, Sarah? And why is my mother's signature on a transfer of the trust's primary assets dated for the day she was allegedly too confused to recognize me?" The room felt like it was tilting. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have to. The mask was gone, and beneath it was a woman who had miscalculated the one thing she thought she had mastered, David's blind devotion. The air in the house changed after the truth was laid bare. The warmth that I had spent 40 years cultivating seemed to evaporate, leaving behind the cold. Clinical silence. Sarah didn't beg for forgiveness. Once she realized the game was up, the saintly wife vanished, replaced by a woman of such icy detachment that it frightened me more than her lies ever had. She simply walked upstairs, packed a single suitcase, and left before the police whom David had called in a daze of betrayal could arrive. But the damage she left behind wasn't something that could be packed away. My home, my sanctuary, felt like a crime scene. David sat at the mahogany table for hours, his head in his hands, the weight of his own guilt bowing his shoulders until he looked like an old man. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered over and over, his voice a broken thread. "I believed her. I almost let them take you. I wanted to hold him, to tell him it was okay, but the truth was that a part of our bond had been severed. The trust that should be instinctive between a mother and son had been poisoned, and the antidote was nowhere to be found. The following weeks were a blur of legal battles and medical detox. The medication, doctor Reese had prescribed had left a lingering fog in my system that took weeks to clear, and every morning I woke up reaching for my memory as if it were a fleeting dream. Doctor Reese vanished as well, his medical license suspended, as the authorities uncovered a trail of fraudulent diagnoses and emptied bank accounts across 3 states. We weren't his only victims, but we were the ones who had to live in the ruins. I had to watch as David sold his own assets to try and recover the trust Sarah had drained, his face growing thinner and his eyes losing the spark of joy I had cherished since he was a boy. We lived together in that big, empty house, two ghosts moving through rooms filled with memories that now felt tainted. Every time I forgot where I put my keys or struggled with a name, a flash of pure terror would cross David's face, and I would see the shadow of Sarah's lies flickering in the corner of the room. She was gone, but she had achieved her goal. She had made us doubt the very ground we stood on. The legacy my husband and I had built was no longer a symbol of security, but a target that had nearly cost me my life. We were safe, yes, but the safety felt like a hollow victory, a quiet house where the only thing louder than the ticking clock was the memory of the betrayal that had almost buried me alive. Antendo que ador da descoberta precisa de espaco para respirar. O bloco six noi apenas sober a partida de Sarah, mas sober o colapso emotional de David e terrible constataco de Eleanor, de que sua casa agora e musu de traix. Continuaco. Block 6. The Aftermath English version. The house felt larger, colder, as if Sarah had taken the very insulation of our lives with her when she walked out the door. The immediate silence was deafening. David remained in the same chair for hours, staring at the empty space where his wife used to sit, his hands still trembling as they held the evidence of her deceit. I stood by the window, watching the taillights of her car vanish into the dusk, and I realized that I didn't feel the triumph I had expected. I felt a hollow, aching exhaustion. The police arrived later that night, their flashlights cutting through the shadows of the parlor, turning my private sanctuary into a cold, documented scene of elder abuse and financial fraud. I had to sit through hours of questioning, my voice still raspy from the chemicals that were finally beginning to leave my system. Every time I answered a question, I saw David flinch. Each detail, the drug tea, the hidden documents, the secret meetings with Eris was a lash against his soul. The deepest wound, however, wasn't the stolen money, it was the psychological wreckage. For days after she left, David couldn't look me in the eye. The guilt had built a new wall between us, one even thicker than Sarah's lies. He would bring me my meals, but his hands would shake so violently the china clattered against the tray. He was terrified of me not because he thought I was mad, but because he was haunted by the fact that he had been the primary weapon in Sarah's arsenal. He had looked at me with pity when he should have looked with protection. He had shushed my pleas for help, dismissing them as the agitation of a dying mind. One evening, I found him in the kitchen, staring at the stove. He didn't hear me come in. He was just standing there, tears streaming down his face, whispering, "I almost let them kill you. I almost signed the papers to lock you away." I realized then that Sarah's ultimate cruelty wasn't just the theft of my estate. It was the way she had forced a son to become his mother's executioner. We had to begin the slow, agonizing process of untangling the web she had spun. The bank accounts were a mess of redirected funds and forged signatures. The legal team Sarah had hired under the guise of estate planning turned out to be a network of associates linked to Eris. Every day brought a new revelation of how deeply she had infiltrated our lives. We found cameras hidden in the vents, used to monitor my movements and manufacture the incidents she reported to David. The house I had loved now felt like a prison cell, where I had been watched and studied like a specimen. I found myself unable to sleep in my own bed, convinced I could still smell her perfume, that scent of jasmine and deception lingering in the curtains. David and I were like two survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to the wreckage of our family, wondering if the shore we were heading toward was even worth reaching. We were free of her, yes, but the cost of that freedom was the absolute destruction of the innocence we once shared. The dust has finally settled, but it is a heavy, gray dust that covers everything we once believed was sacred. It has been 6 months since Sarah's car faded into the evening fog, and the silence in this house no longer screams. It merely hums a low, melancholic tune. We managed to freeze the offshore accounts, and the legal battle to reclaim the house is nearing its end, but the victory feels brittle, like parchment left too long in the sun. My mind has returned to me, clear and sharp as a winter morning. Yet I find myself mourning the woman I was before the poison. I am no longer just Eleanor, the mother and grandmother. I am a survivor of a war fought in the kitchen and the library. A woman who had to witness the darkness lurking behind a smile she once welcomed. David stays with me now, not as my jailer, but as a man trying to mend a vase that has been shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. We speak in hushed tones, carefully navigating the minefield of our memories. Sometimes, when I walk into a room, I see him look at me with a lingering shadow of doubt, and I know he is checking for the flicker Sarah taught him to fear. And when he sees me clearly, he looks away, his face etched with the unbearable weight of a man who almost became an accomplice to his mother's erasure. Forgiveness is not a single act. It is a slow, agonizing labor. I have forgiven David, for I know that love can be the most effective blindfold. But the innocence of our bond is gone. We are two people who know exactly how easy it is for the world to turn cold. I spend my afternoons in the parlor, the sunlight still casting those patterns of amber and blue on the floorboards, but I no longer see them as symbols of a perfect life. They are just light and shadow, fleeting and unreliable. Sarah is still out there, somewhere, hiding behind a new name and a new smile, and that thought remains a cold stone in my stomach. She didn't just steal money, she stole our ability to feel safe in the presence of kindness. Yet, as I sit here, holding a cup of tea that I made myself, I realize that there is a quiet strength in being the one who remained. I am Eleanor, and my story didn't end in a restricted ward or a drug-induced haze. I am the architect of my own reality again. The table is still set for 2, and though the laughter that used to fill this room has been replaced by a cautious, fragile peace, it is a peace built on the truth. And in the end, that is the only legacy worth leaving: the courage to face the monster, even when she calls you mother and offers you a cup of tea. There is a specific kind of silence that inhabits a house after a war has been fought within its walls. It isn't peaceful, it is heavy, like the air before a storm that never breaks. I sit in my usual chair, the one Sarah once tried to convince me I had forgotten how to use, and I watch the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. I am 68, but I feel like I have lived 2 lifetimes, one of warmth and ignorance, and another of cold, medicinal clarity. My mind is my own again, but it is a scarred landscape. Every time I hesitate for a second to find a word, or every time I misplace my reading glasses, my heart stops. For a heartbeat, I am back in that fog, wondering if the poison is still there, or if Sarah was right all along that the end is coming for me, just slower this time. This is her final curse. She stole my confidence in my own existence. David is in the next room. I hear the floorboards creak under his weight, the weight of a man who sleeps with a ghost of guilt. He is more attentive now than he ever was, bringing me flowers, checking on me every hour, but his kindness feels like a penance. When our eyes meet, there is a mirror between us that neither of us wants to look into. He sees the mother he almost betrayed. I see the son who was capable of believing I was fading away. We are trying to rebuild, brick by brick, but the mortar is made of apologies that can never be loud enough to drown out the memory of those whispered conversations in the study. I sometimes wonder if he still sees Sarah when he closes his eyes, if he misses the woman he thought she was, and if he hates himself for that secret longing. The bank accounts have been frozen, and the house is legally mine again, but it no longer feels like a home. It feels like a museum dedicated to a crime that was never fully punished. Sarah is a shadow in another city now, a predator who moved on to another forest, and I am left here to tend to the scorched earth. I have realized that some things cannot be fixed. They can only be survived. I look at the cross on the wall, and I no longer ask for things to be as they were. I only ask for the strength to endure what they have become. I am Eleanor, and I am still here. My tea is cold, the room is dim, and my son is a stranger I am learning to love again. We are safe, but we are broken, and perhaps that is the most honest ending a life like mine can have. The truth didn't set us free. It just gave us the light. We needed to see the wreckage.